Now that we've walked through the inputs and how to build game trees, and we've walked through this interface here and talked through just the general output interface, I want to spend this video going through how to actually interact with this output and start the process of node locking and changing some of these things within the outputs. As we've discussed in Module 1, node locking is a critical skill to learn as it relates to using solvers. Some of the best players in the world, when they're building their strategies, they're not necessarily using or relying on equilibrium strategies. What they're doing is they are locking particular parts of the game tree and rerunning the solver to see how the solver reacts with an additional constraint put into place. And that's really what node locking is. Node locking is adding an additional constraint to the game tree and then rerunning the game tree based on that additional parameter that we've locked into place. Because as we can see here from looking at the output itself, and I'll go to the in position player's response here after the out of position player checks, part of the output is the solver allocating various combinations, various hands into a check range, into a small bet range, into a large bet range. It's varying each of the individual combinations, each of the individual hands in each of the strategic options as an output in an effort to maximize the overall expectation value. But within node locking, what we can do is we can lock some of the actions for the individual combinations, some of the actions for the individual hands at one or more nodes, and then rerun the solver with everything else unlocked. And what the solver will actually do in this case here is it will now treat those as fixed inputs and only vary the rest of the game tree given those fixed constraints. And that, again, that's the power of node locking here, is you can start designing additional tests based on specific assumptions that we might make, such as maybe our opponent bluffs too much, so we want to node lock all of the bluffing combos as bets. Or maybe our opponent calls too much, so we want to node lock a lot of the combinations as calls. We can put in whatever constraint that we actually want into place and see how we should optimally play against those specific assumptions based on what we actually enter into the solver. So that's what we're going to be covering today in this video, is how we actually would interface with GTO Plus to node lock and to specifically lock individual actions in place. So when you look at the interface itself, there is these buttons down here at the bottom. And by default, when you are working through GTO Plus, it's going to have this section highlighted, which is analysis mode, no edits. And the analysis mode here, I can try to click on the game tree and you can see nothing is going to happen because I'm not really editing the game tree at this point in time. However, if I want to node lock, the first thing I want to do when I'm node locking is click this button here, which is lock and edit decision. And if I do this here, you're now going to see this little lock appear on the node. And what that lock is there to do is to remind you that this decision point is now under node locking. I can now go back to analysis mode, and if I don't make any changes, this lock will disappear. But I'm going to go back into lock and edit decision, and the one good thing about GTO Plus is if I do make changes to this node, when I go back to analysis mode, the lock will actually stay on that particular node. So now I know that I've made some changes to this particular node, and that node is going to be node locked if I run the solver again. So I'm going to click lock and edit decision, and there's a couple icons that pop up, which I will go through them in a brief moment. But I want to now talk about how we actually would node lock and why we might node lock here. So now that I've actually locked and edited the decision, we have a few different options that we can start interfacing with the system. Now I can actually click on these options here, and you can see this current selection will change. The three options that I have are the same three strategic options that we gave the solver at the beginning of the construction of the game tree. So the in position player here has the option to bet large 4.3, which is the same option that's up here, to bet small, 2.15, which is the second option right here, or to check. And now I can interface with the game tree itself to fix any of those specific options for any of the individual hands or even individual combinations in range. So let's say, suppose we want to fix a strategy for the in-position player. We're the out-of-position player here in this case. Maybe we're looking at this from the out-of-position player's perspective, and we have an idea as to how we think the in-position player might behave. Or another example here is maybe we're the in-position player and we want to test a specific strategy and see what is the best counter exploit against this strategy to make sure that we aren't leaving ourselves open to easy exploitation. Well, what I would do here in this case here is I can interface with the options here in the game tree to fix any one of these three options to any one of the individual combinations or hands. So let me just maybe start by saying, suppose I want to say anything top pair or better, I want to put into this large betting range. Well, what I would do here is first click on the large bet size, and I want to put top pair or better hands in this betting range. Now, I first want to start with the best hands, which are my sets. Well, I can do so by just clicking on it, and you'll see now once I clicked on this, the jacks changed here, and I'll kind of highlight over this so you can actually see, and let me lock over this so you can see. The jacks now changed from a mixed betting pattern to all bet large, and you can see the color coding here. It's all now put into this large bet sizing. I'll hit F9 again and go back to normal. The other sets here are nines, and again, I'll hover over this now to see and hit F9, so you can see right now nines are split somewhat between the large and small bet. If I click on it again, it now changes to all large bets. And then finally, the bottom option here is pocket sixes, and that's the last set. I can click on that again, and now that fixes as a large bet itself as well too. If I want to hover over the two pairs are the same exact way. I can hover over this and click Jack 9 and suited, which is for the large bet size. And then finally, I said over pairs and then top pair. The over pairs are queens, kings, and aces. I can click these, and all three of these now are for large bet sizes. There's another easy way to actually do this as well too. So suppose I want to do this for top pairs. I can actually interface with the Manhattan graph here. And I didn't really talk about the Manhattan graphs when I looked at the outputs here, but you can see down here at the bottom of the screen, as I hover over everything, you can see visually different strategic frequencies are mixed throughout the ranges. The colors they look like they're blending together, but you can actually kind of see it's organized from the highest equity hand on the left all the way to the lowest equity hand on the right. And that's also broken up here on the individual breakdowns. If I want to quickly just say, well, all top pairs now I want to put into this large bet sizing, I now actually can go over this Manhattan graph here on the hands class, click down, and I usually try to click in the middle and then drag over to the left and then come back and drag over to the right. And now very quickly you can see the top pairs were all allocated into this big bet sizing. So, and you can easily kind of look at this and confirm by seeing at this right side all of the combos that are actually in the range and how many of them are put into the large bet sizing, how many of them are put into the small bet sizing, and how many of them are put into the check sizing. And we can confirm this and say that all of these sets, two pairs, over pairs, and top pairs were put into the large bet sizing. All right, let me right click to release the filter. I can also do this for the smaller bet sizing here. And maybe I want to, and please also don't, this is not the way in which I would construct this range. I just want to demonstrate how to actually use this functionality. But now I can click the smaller bet sizing, and maybe I want to bet my middle pairs for the smaller bet sizing here. And I can do the same thing here. I can either click through the nines. I've already made this now, my current selection here is this smaller bet sizing, and I can click nines that way. or I can go over to the middle pair hand class and use my slider across, and now I changed all of my middle pairs to this smaller bet sizing. Suppose I want to actually mix, and I can mix here as well too. Well, now if I wanted to actually mix, and maybe I wanted to take all of my pocket pairs less than the top pair, so that my pocket 10s here, and then all of my weak pairs, and I want to actually split between the smaller bet sizing and the checks. Well, what I would do in this case here is I would double click here on the current selection, and this will pop up this distribution box, in which case I can put any weighting that I actually want here. So I would put 50% for the small bet and 50% for the check, and then click done. And then you'll see this reflected in the current selection, and what it'll do is it'll split between half of the small bet and half of the checks. And I said I want to do this for pocket 10s and all of my weak pairs. And you'll see that reflected in the graph itself, is that it'll take half of all of these hands and put them into the bet small range, and half of all of these hands and put them into the check range. Now I'm going to right click on this, and I'm also going to lock this combination matrix here on the left hand side of the screen, because now you can see the interesting part is that even at the combination level, it's going to split this evenly all the way through. So all of these are going to be split 50-50, no matter if it's in full combination. So these top hands, pocket 8s, ace 6 suited, king 6 suited, etc., pocket 7s, they're all being split. They're in full combinations within range. They're being split 50-50 between the bet small and check ranges. But then 7-6 suited, we actually only have 80% of that combination in range. It's still being split at a 50-50 ratio, but now it's 0.403 combos are put in the small bet sizing, and 0.403 combos are put in the check ranging. So it'll do so at that same weighting that we've allocated right here. And I'll release the filter here to exit out of that. But suppose I actually want to get a little bit more granular, and I want to go down to the individual combination level. Well, I can do that as well too. And that's where this lock functionality comes into play significantly. So maybe I want to bet all of my offsuit combinations that have a heart in them as well too, because there are 2 hearts on the board, and this is something that is a regular use case here, is that, you know, maybe I want to do something a little bit differently with a backdoor flush draw than I would if I don't necessarily have a heart and that backdoor flush draw. And so I'm actually going to put all of them in this small bet sizing here. So I'll first highlight over, and I'll actually going to choose some of these offsuit Broadway hands, but I'll highlight over ace king offsuit as an example, and I'm going to click F9 to lock that in place. And now maybe I want to choose these ones with the hearts, but these other ones I actually want to put into a check range. And I can do so and interact with this part of the interface, and I don't have to worry about it on this side. So I'll take the F9 off, and you can see at a high level, ace king offsuit, I'm splitting 50-50 between bet smalls and checks, but it's not being split evenly like I am doing so with these pocket 7s or pocket 8s, where it's splitting each individual combo 50-50. I'm actually splitting this pure by betting half of the ace kings if they contain a heart, and checking the ace kings if they do not contain a heart here. So at a macro level, we are putting half of the ace king offsuits into this bet small range and half of the ace king offsuits into the check range. But at that more micro combination level, it is pure in the sense that we're only betting if we have a heart. So you can do so for any one of these individual combos or all of those individual combos. And again, this is where I love this lock functionality. It's really easy to do so by hovering over any of these that you actually want, clicking F9, and then working from here to edit this particular window itself. You can also do so at using this particular window, and I tend to use this a lot too, is, you know, maybe you want to play flush draws similarly, or maybe you want to play open-ended straight draws similarly, or gut shots similarly. So you can right click for this, and work with this screen itself, or you can lock any of these screens and work with this screen. So it's really up to you as to how you want to interface with which window you want to interface. And then finally, what you can work with here is this bottom Manhattan graph. So we've already talked about how to actually edit the Manhattan graph right here. Suppose you just want to bet the entire range for a small sizing. And I know we've changed a lot here, but what I can do is I can just click on this small sizing and work with this bottom Manhattan graph and highlight everything. And now you'll see that the entire range has changed to this smaller sizing here. So if this is really, really great if you're looking to simplify considerably and see how the opponent would react against a simplified strategy, or maybe if you think your opponent is playing a simplified strategy and you want to find the counter exploit to that, it's a great way to very, very, very quickly just change everything in the range to one simple sizing. You can undo things, so that's where some of this work comes into play. So I can undo all of the changes, and that would take me back to the original change, or I can just use Control Z to undo the last step. So I'm going to use Control Z, and it took me 2 clicks to do this, so I'll do Control Z twice. That'll take me back to the first customized setting that I set. I could also push this button here, and that'll take me back to this unlocked state where we just went back to the equilibrium setting, which was the output, and we took all of the changes that we made in the node locking out of the actual system itself. I'm gonna go back into lock and edit decision mode, and I'm finally going to just change this real fast, and I want to put 50-50 for each of these 2 bet sizings, and I'm gonna actually make the entire range this split between both of the bet sizings here to demonstrate my last point here within the node locking options is this last button here of merge actions together. Suppose I'm actually working through this and I have the tree built and I have the large bet size option and the small bet size option, and I want to see, well, maybe I don't want to work with 2 bet size options anymore. Well, what I can actually do here is click this merge actions together button, and it's going to give me the option to say what actions do I want to merge, and maybe I want to only use a small bet size option. So I'm going to click the 2 options that I want to merge, and I can merge them to either one of those options, in which case here I'm going to merge it all into the smaller bet size. And then I can click merge, and now automatically the entire window will change to the small bet size option, and all of those actions will come down to this small bet size. You'll see here also that the large bet size option is still there. I just took the actions and moved the actions to the smaller bet size option. So a really quick way to move everything from one to another. When I'm happy with the node, and when I'm happy with whatever I've node locked, so again, I can do this however I want. I can move on and I can node lock another node. So you'll see here again, it's no edits here is being shown by default. The lock stays on this one though. And I can lock and edit this decision. So maybe I want to put everything into a calling range. And again, this is not what I would recommend, but I'm just gonna quickly just do this to demonstrate. But now I put everything into a calling range, and I can continue node locking as much as I want, and the locks will show up on whatever node that I've actually node locked. And when I get to a point where I'm comfortable with the strategies that I put into place, and it's a model that I'm also comfortable with, I would have to rerun the solver, because at this point here, we've only changed the strategic actions. We haven't actually run the solver again. So these equities will change, and you'll actually see GTO Plus does a really good job here of removing the expectation value. I didn't really kind of highlight this, but when you first open GTO Plus and the equilibrium values are shown, you'll see an extra metric right here for expectation value. But now that we've changed some things, the expectation value will change, and GTO Plus hasn't recalculated that yet. So if we want to find out, well, what's the expectation value now given these parameters, I'm going to have to run the solver again. So I can do so the same exact way I ran the solver in the first place. I'll just go and click Run Solver, and I can update my settings however I want to here. And when I'm done, I click Run Solver, and I'll do this right now, and we'll probably zoom up the speed in a second here. But what you'll see is the solver is going to start running again based on these parameters. So let's fast forward in time while this runs, and we'll take a look at how the output changes based on what we've entered in the input here. So now that the solver has finished running, we can see that we've reached an equilibrium, or we've reached an accuracy under the 1% threshold. So we're within 1% of what this equilibrium would look like here. And we can jump into the actual solution to see that the EV actually hasn't changed a ton in this case here, but with this specific parameter, by putting the in position player and funneling all of the individual combinations in range to bet this smaller sizing. And also when the out of position player will call everything in range here. The one thing that does change here is that now the out of position player has allocated a portion of range into a leading range here. But what actually really happens here is that we've somewhat simplified the flop and we've pushed everything over to the turn. So I would imagine here is if we compared the turns, we would see very, very different strategies on turns than we would on with the unlocked versions, because now we're funneling 98.8% of the time we go to this check range, and then every single time when we go to this check line, we always funnel every combination into a small bet, and then we funnel every combination from the out of position player here into the call range here. So we're basically pushing everything to the turn and starting the game tree from there. But again, even just those small changes alone, now we can see that the out of position player is putting some hands into a lead range here to account for this. And based on this, now we can look at responses from the in position player based on this leading range here too. So this doesn't actually show as drastic of changes here, but sometimes we'll actually run node locks and you'll see very significant changes. And I imagine actually if we unlocked this portion of the tree, and you can unlock and lock things by right-clicking on the game tree itself, you may see some very drastic changes in the outputs by node locking things here too. So let's just try running this one more time briefly, and I'm going to now unlock just this response. So now we're only going to look at this by locking the in position player's 100% bet here on the after a check, but we won't force the out of position player to call everything here. So let's just run this solver one more time and see what this looks like. So we're back here, and I want to actually just demonstrate this last piece of functionality before the solver actually stops. You'll see here that we have this option here to stop the solver or to pause. I can actually pause this right now, and the solver will pause where it is, and then go back to playing it again, and the solver will kind of start up back again where it is. I can also, if the solver is taking a really long time, and I'm comfortable with the accuracy, so maybe I just want to see what the solution looks like, or I'm, fine with 2% accuracy here, and I'll do this for demonstration purposes here. I can click Stop Solver, and it's down here to 2.27%, but I'm gonna click Stop Solver, and it's actually just gonna finalize here as a solution. So I didn't quite get to the accuracy level that I wanted to, but it's gonna basically say this is good. Since I've said this is good enough, the solver is gonna give me this as a solution. So let's just take a look here again, and now just by locking this one node, we can see that the solver basically puts everything again into a check range. The EV now goes up for the out of position player. So since we haven't forced the out of position player to call everything, after this smaller bet sizing here, the out of position player can now respond optimally against this specific strategy here. And now there are some hands that are put into folds, there's some hands that are put into raises, etc. So again, this is, you can now start seeing the power of node locking. I can fix certain things. The strategic frequencies for some of the nodes can now become an input by fixing those. And the solver now is going to optimize everything around that given those individual parameters. So I hope that all made sense. We're going to cover node locking in far more detail in Module 5 as we're talking about how to build exploitative strategies. But this is how you can do so within GTO Plus, and I wanted to demonstrate this functionality for you here. In the next video, I'm going to go through some of these additional functionality up here. So we'll talk through editing the game trees. We're going to talk through this play against the solution functionality. I'll also wrap up with the advanced database mode here. So we'll cover what database mode looks like. And then finally, I'll go through the menu items up at the top of the screen. So I'll see you in that next video, and we'll wrap up the GTO Plus instructional manual portion of these videos.